And thank you for this invitation. So today I will talk about the concept of energy cascade in turbulence. And first, I want to remind you that turbulence is everywhere at every scale and everywhere around us. So as you know, it is in ocean and in atmosphere, but also around galaxies or around around objects that move in a flow, like cars or other types of things. And we are lucky because in turbulence, we have the equation. These are the Navier-Stokes equations that I recall here. And as you may know, there is a control parameter, which is called the Reynolds number, which is a product of the typical velocity and by a typical scale of the system divided by the viscosity of the fluid. And typically, we say that there is turbulence when this Reynolds number is very large. So for example, in ocean, it can be 10 to the 11, in planetary atmosphere, 10 to the 12, galaxies 20 to the 21. So really all these flows are turbulent. That's why I said turbulent is everywhere. And one very important aspect of the turbulence is the existence of vortices. So here I show you, for example, pictures of the ocean taken from some satellite. And here you see clearly that there are a lot of vortices in the ocean. And even more striking, what you see is that there are vortices of different size, from big size here to small size here. And so there is really a whole hierarchy of vortices in the ocean. But of course, this is also true in the atmosphere. And here you see less clearly, but still you see the vortices that are seen through the clouds that are trapped within the vortices. And here also you see here large scale vortices and then smaller one. And you clearly see that turbulence is about vortices. Some other place where there are vortices, of course, is more usually in the lab. And why we turn to the lab is because in ocean and atmosphere, flows are a little bit difficult to measure. While in the lab, you have control experiment and you can repeat the same experiment, do statistics, study more closer this part or this part of the flow. And so this is very interesting to understand turbulence. So in this talk, a lot of measurements that I will show were done in the von Karman experiment. So here you have a picture of this von Karman experiment. It is basically a cylinder filled with some fluid. So typically here it will be water. And it is set into motion by two counter-rotating impellers so that the flow typically looks like this. It is a kind of giant vortices at large scale. And in between, there are a lot of small vortices that are created. To see these vortices, what we typically do is we put particles into the flow, we light them with a laser, and then we record the movement of the particle using 4 fast cameras. And that way, by following the motion of particle, we can derive their velocity, and we can reconstruct the velocity field, like here in a plane, or on the right, we can even follow the particle like little burrows. So we can also measure the velocity. And we see also that we are able to capture a lot of vortices in the flow. So really, there is a whole vortex hierarchy in the lab, in the ocean, in the atmosphere, and more generally in any turbulent flow. And this hierarchy was already known in 1922 by Lewis Fry Richardson, the famous meteorologist. And he used a kind of poem to describe this hierarchy, which has become now very famous. It was, he said, he describes the hierarchy in this way. Big wheels have little wheels that feed on their velocity, and little wheels have lesser wheels, and so on to viscosity. So in his picture, it's a kind of pyramid. You have big vortices at the top, and then on them you have smaller one, and smaller, and smaller, and smaller. And this is a kind of pyramid that extends from large scale to small scale. So this is a kind of nice description, but it's not very quantitative. And it was only about 20 years after that Kolmogorov developed a theory to describe quantitatively this hierarchy. So this theory is very interesting because it is one of the few exact results that you can derive from Navier-Stokes equation. And it is based on a famous equation, which was first derived by Karman and Haworth. And this equation, I recorded it here. It is a kind of energy budget, which is described using this very important quantity in turbulence, which is the velocity increment at a scale L. So it is typically the velocity difference between 2 points separated by a distance L. And in this energy budget, you can derive it from Navier-Stokes equation using only an homogeneity assumption. And what does this energy budget? He says that the time variation of this quantity, delta U square, which is a kind of energy at a scale, kinetic energy at the scale L, is equal, so depends on 3 terms. So the first one, epsilon, is the quantity of energy that is put into the fluid. So for example, in our experiment, it is through the rotation of the impellers. And then it also depends on the viscosity. Here, this term, it just represents the dissipation of kinetic energy by the viscosity of the fluid. And then there is this third term, which is the divergence of delta U cube to the cube, which is a kind of energy transfer and which describes how the energy flow from large eddies to smaller eddies. So you have these 3 terms, which with different physical interpretation. And the beauty of the Kolmogorov theory, and it is very simple, in fact, is to assume 2 very important assumptions, is to make two more assumptions. One is about stationarity. It says, now let us consider stationary turbulence. If you do that, then you can cross out the time variation of the kinetic energy. And then you are left with a balance between only 3 terms. And then he says that in a range of scale where this viscous term is negligible, and he calls it the inertial range, then you have a very simple law, is that the divergence of delta U cube, this flux term, is equal to epsilon. And by simple integration, then from this you derive an exact law of turbulence, which is called the 4/3 law of turbulence, by which the third moment of the velocity increment is proportional to the scale L, with a coefficient that is also exact. So this is an exact law of turbulence, which only comes from homogeneity and stationarity. And now if you further assume self-similarity, then you can say that the second moment of viscosity should scale like the 3rd order to the power 2/3. And then from this, you derive that delta U square goes like epsilon L to the 2/3. And then by simple Fourier transfer, you derive that the energy spectrum of your hierarchy of vortices should scale like a constant times epsilon 2/3 k minus 5/3. And here epsilon is the mean rate of energy input or energy dissipation in a stationary situation in your fluid. So this is a very simple law and very, very important. And it gives some ground on the Lewis-Frey-Richardson picture, in that you have a kind of energy cascade in the fluid. Here I have drawn the energy spectrum as a function of the wave number. So what you say is that you have typically a k minus 5/3 law. And the idea is that when you put some work into your system, for example, by rotating the impellers, then you create big vortices that are just transformed into smaller and smaller vortices by this energy transfer term. So this produces a cascade, a self-similar cascade with an exponent minus 5/3. And in the end of this cascade, the viscosity enters into action, dissipates the energy into heat, and this concludes the cascade. So this picture is very important because it has some very strong implication for example, for modeling of turbulence. Because through this picture, you see that you have a lot of scales in turbulence. So you have a lot of scale between the larger scale, which is the scale at which you inject the energy, and you have the smallest scale in your system. Here is the scale at which dissipation enters and viscosity enters and dissipates everything into heat. So this sets you the smallest scale into the system, which by dimensional ground, you can compute it, and it just depends on the viscosity and the rate of energy transfer with this power. And so if you want to simulate a flow or describe the flow, it means that you have a whole bunch of scale to take into account. And this sets you the number of grid points you have to put into your numerical simulation, namely the number of grid points may be the ratio of the larger scale of the system, the scale at which energy is input, to the smaller scale of the system. So in the Kolmogorov theory, it's equal to this quantity, nu and eta, which is called the Kolmogorov scale, to the third power. So n, it can be a very large number. Because what you can show is that it scales like the Reynolds number of the flow to the power 9/4. So it can be a pretty large number, but thanks to the progress of numerical simulation, now we reach a point where this number is of the order of 10 to 7 in our experiments at Reynolds 6 to the 1000. So now, thanks to the progress of computer, we can still accommodate this number of degrees of freedom on the computer, and we are able to do numerical simulation of our flow. What I will show you in the sequel is that, unfortunately, maybe this number is strongly under-evaluated, and maybe the situation is not so simple. But before that, we continue on the story. What is very interesting from an historical point of view is that Kolmogorov made his theory in 1941, and we had to wait until 1962 until this theory was checked. And it was checked actually in the ocean, in the Seymour Narrows. It is a kind of a narrows between Vancouver and Quadra Island. Here you see the little ships that are taken measurement. And by taking velocity measurement in these things, they were able to have a very wide range of scale and to be able to measure the first Kolmogorov spectrum ever observed. So this was a very strong confirmation of Kolmogorov theory. And of course, nowadays, we have much better ways to measure velocities, and we are able to check that indeed, Kolmogorov theory is very good at describing the vortex hierarchy and the Kolmogorov spectrum. Here you have an example of various Kolmogorov spectrum measured from different numerical simulation at different Reynolds number. You see that they all collapse and they all scale like k to the -5/3. And here you have a spectrum measured in our experiment. And what I want to stress is that there are experiments that are taken in the middle of the experiment where the turbulence is really homogeneous, or near the border of the experiment where the turbulence is not so homogeneous. And you see that even so, they really all collapse onto the Kolmogorov spectrum. So this means that the Kolmogorov theory, which is an exact theory, is really robust and really good. So what are the problems? First, I forgot to mention that we can even nowadays check very quantitatively the Kolmogorov theory by checking the scaling of the various terms of the Kolmogorov theory. I remind you, this is the energy balance of the Karman-Nowars equation that was derived, that Kolmogorov used to derive his theory. And you see that according to Kolmogorov, this energy transfer term should be constant in the inertial range. while the viscous term by dimensional argument following this scaling should go like L to the minus 4/3, it should increase. And this is in fact what we are observing in our experiments. The laws of Kolmogorov are satisfied in the inertial range. They increase like L to the minus 4/3 for the viscous term, and they are constant in the inertial range for the energy transfer term, like predicted by Kolmogorov. So really, it seems that everything is good about Kolmogorov, and there is nothing to worry about it. But in fact, even before the Kolmogorov spectrum was observed in the nature, George Batchelor, the famous one, raised an objection in 1941, which was kind of very severe against Kolmogorov. So what was this objection? It was an objection based on the statistics of the velocity derivatives. So velocity derivatives are kind of velocity increments in some sense. And so if the turbulence were really self-similar, you can expect that this kind of quantity, which are just built using average of gradient of the velocity, should behave like constant, should not depend on the Reynolds number. And what he observed is that they depend on the Reynolds number, and they depend stronger and stronger as the Reynolds number increases. And if this observation is true, it is a very bad argument against Kolmogorov law. So Batchelor was very clever. He says, so how can it be wrong? And he tried to do observation of the different scale of the flow. And at this time, he didn't have a lot of way to measure the scale. So he did it using a hot wire and some oscillogram. And what he observed is that as he was looking at higher and higher frequencies, the signal seems to be more turbulent and become distributed in kind of burst, very intermittent. So even before you see the Kolmogorov theory was satisfied, Batchelor already had an argument against it based on this observation. And in fact, a few years later, Landau, another famous physicist, had an even stronger and more precise objection on Kolmogorov by observing that in a flow, the energy dissipation is in fact very inhomogeneous. Here you see picture of energy dissipation from a numerical simulation, and here picture of energy dissipation in the ocean. And what you see is that it's not homogeneous at all. There are higher dissipation near the coast, for example, here. Then Lev Landau says, you see the dissipation is so highly inhomogeneous that there is no way that turbulence can be self-similar. There must be something wrong in the theory. And for sure, if we observe more closely the turbulence, then we will see that Kolmogorov theory is wrong. And indeed, this was confirmed a few years later, starting in the 1990s, by looking at quantities that are called the velocity structure function in the following way. According to the Kolmogorov theory, the velocity increment should scale like L to the 1/3, and if turbulence is self-similar, then the p order moment of the scaling exponent then should go like L to the p over 3. So what you can do is compute easily this quantity in a fluid. Here I have an example that was done in my experiment. So this is in log, and several color codes several p's. So p equal 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And here in the middle between about 1.5 and 3, this is the inertial range where the Kolmogorov delta U equal L to the 1/3 should be satisfied. So what you observe is that indeed you have very clear power law, so they are self-similar, but there is some kind of similarity. But now they are clear power law. I can measure the exponent. They are here written in little red stars. And you see that if Kolmogorov theory was correct, it should go like n/3, and you see clear deviation from this subsimilarity. So clearly there is a problem with Kolmogorov 41, and we need to understand why. So the first thing that did Kolmogorov in 1962, it's Kolmogorov himself that corrected his own model. He says, okay, dissipation is not homogeneous, so I cannot make a global assumption like this. Let's do a local assumption and say that this relation is still true, but using a local dissipation in a ball. So in that way, the velocity structure function now depends on the moment of the energy dissipation in a ball. And you predict that in addition to the factor p/3 that comes from the L to the 1/3, then there should be a correction term to p/3, which depends on the statistical properties of epsilon. And in his paper, Kolmogorov made the second assumption, is that the local dissipation has a log normal distribution. So namely that it's the average of its log should scale linearly with a scale, with an exponent in front that characterize, in fact, this exponent 2/p/3, which now is quadratic in p and with a constant that is exactly this constant that characterize the moment of the law. So it was a strong assumption out of nowhere. And in fact, what is very interesting is that this prediction is very good. Here you see various check of this prediction in a numerical simulation. Here you have the PDF of log of epsilon and at different scale. And you see that they all collapse on the black line, which is the log normal model. Here on the right, you see the different stars are the check that average of log of epsilon is linear in log of L/L with an exponent that is connected with the moment of the dissipation over a ball, and you see that it's satisfied, etc. The Kolmogorov-Oblukov model works very well. So at this point, we have several questions. Why is the local dissipation log normal? I mean, this is an assumption by Kolmogorov, but he doesn't derive it from Navier-Stokes. And why does this local scaling work? And can we explain it by Navier-Stokes like Kolmogorov did it in 41? This is, in some sense, a kind of failure of the Kolmogorov-Oblukov model is that it does not derive directly from Navier-Stokes. So the first attempt to derive it from Navier-Stokes was in 1995, the multifractal model of Parisi and Frisch. And the way they derive it from Navier-Stokes is kind of indirect, is that they observe that there is a fundamental symmetry of Navier-Stokes equation, which is called the H rescaling. That if you take Navier-Stokes equation and you apply the following rescaling over all the quantities in the Navier-Stokes equation, time goes like lambda 1 minus h, scale is multiplied by lambda, velocity multiplied by lambda to the h for arbitrary lambda h, then the equations are invariant. And so observing this, Parisi and Frisch say, okay, this means that there could be other scaling invariants. There could be some local scaling invariants everywhere in the fluid. And so, for example, there could be patches in the fluid where locally the velocity increment scale like h to the 0.32, and then another place where h scales like 0.3, and then another scale where it scales like 0.2. We don't know. And so they characterize then they introduce then the function C of h, which is a codimension of the places where the velocity increment scales like L to the h. And using this, you can show by some simple statistical arguments that then the exponent of the velocity structure of a function should scale like the minimum over all h of nh plus C of h. So all the properties of the scaling of the velocity structure function should be encoded in C of h, the multifractal spectrum. So to measure it, it's quite simple. If you have your exponent here, then you can show that the slope locally at some point, the slope gives you the value of h, and the intercept gives you the value of c of h at this h. So using this simple construction, you can build the multifractal spectrum, and it looks like this. It is a parabole. And it has a minimum close to h equal 1/3, which is the Kolmogorov exponent. So this is very strange. The fact that it is parabolic means that the distribution is close to log normal again. And again, it points a special role played by the Kolmogorov exponent h equal 1/3. So here, even so, if this theory extends a little bit Kolmogorov picture and show the intermittency in a broader range, we are still left with 4 fundamental questions. Why is the local dissipation log normal? Why does the local scaling work? Can we explain it by Navier-Stokes, like Kolmogorov 41? And you see that the argument of Parisi-Frisch is not fully satisfying, because even so he uses some symmetry of Navier-Stokes, it is quite indirect. We can think of many other equations that have the same symmetry and that maybe would not give the same result. And why is the exponent 1/3 so special? So in the rest of my talk, I will give you now a modern view on these topics and try to answer to these 4 questions. And for this, I will come back to a very fundamental properties of turbulence, which is properties of dissipation in a turbulent fluid. If you look at the dissipation in a turbulent fluid as a function of viscosity, you have a very special behavior, is that as you increase the Reynolds number, the energy dissipation in the fluid becomes independent of the viscosity. And if this is true, then this means that you have places where gradients can become very large. Indeed, the energy dissipation is a product of velocity times average of the gradient square. You can show it very easily. Or you can show it that, in fact, it is also equal to this viscosity times the average of the vorticity square. And so if epsilon is a constant as mu tends to 0, then you can easily see that this means that in the limit mu tends to 0, the vorticity has to diverge. So it means that in a turbulence flow, in the inviscid limit, there are divergences in the flow. I see that there is a question.
Yeah, I encourage people to write them in the Q&A, and then I will read them later.
Okay. Okay, so this is very, very puzzling. And so this means that if there are some areas when there are very big gradients and very irregular properties, then we should do something special and we should be very cautious when we deal with Navier-Stokes equation. And so, for example, when we build energy balance, like Kolmogorov use, maybe we should take into account this property that you can have very big gradients in the flow. And in fact, this is what Duchamp and Robert, some 2 mathematicians, did in 2000. And they were able to build this local energy budget, taking into account, taking special tools so that, irregularity of the flow can be taken into account. And so they show that locally, the energy, the kinetic energy locally of the fluid is equal to a flux term, which just is the advection of the energy by the flow. Then it can be dissipated by the viscosity. This is, so you are all used to this kind of energy budget. But there is an additional term which comes from the fact that you took into account the possible irregularity of the fluid. And this additional term, you see, they showed it, that it is the limit at L tends to 0 of this term, which is a gradient of a regular test function times the velocity increments to the power 3. So this term, in fact, here that I'm circling here, is just a kind of local energy transfer from one scale to another one. And the inertial dissipation, what they call inertial dissipation, is just the limit as L tends to 0 of this small local energy transfer. So why do they call it inertial dissipation? Because you see this term has no viscosity in it. So it could be an explanation of why the energy dissipation does not depend on the viscosity. Because if all dissipation is ensured by this kind of term, then it will explain, it has no viscosity, so it will explain why it tends to be constant. And how could it be? It is easy to see that this term is the limit as L tends to 0 of L3h minus 1, if you say that the velocity scale like L to the h. And so here you see that there is a clear cutoff between two types of flow, those in which h can only be bigger than 1/3. And in this case, you see that this that du is a limit as L tends to 0 of a term that tends to 0, so it does not contribute. So in this term, even if there are some irregularities, they cannot dissipate energy. While, so all the dissipation, in fact, is produced by viscosity. While now, if somewhere in the flow there is places where H is less than 1/3, then you can have dissipation through irregularities of the flow, through singularities, without viscosity. And here you see a first answer to one of the questions I was asking. You see from this that H equal 1/3 plays a very special role because it is the border between the case where fluid dissipates energy through irregularities and fluid does not dissipate energy through irregularities. So just to show you an example of this term, of what does this term as a function of scale, we can show, for example, let's take a very simple singularities. It's a shock. It is produced by an equation of this type, the Burgers equation in 1D. If I compute the term on this fluid, which has a singularity here at the point x equals 0, where you see that there is a jump of the viscosity, this term, as a function of L, is 0 everywhere in the ramp here, where the fluid is regular, and start to be big at the location where the gradients are very big. And you see, as you decrease the scale, this term becomes bigger and bigger and point towards the location where there is a singularity. So in some sense, this term here that I can show you, this term here, which I call D of L, is a kind of pointer that shines you the places where there are irregularities and where there are very strong gradients. So what we did in our experiment, we say, okay, we have this term that points toward places where there are very high gradients. Let's look in a turbulent flow, what kind of topologies, what kind of structure are associated with these places. And so this is an example of what we did. We have velocity field. We compute this quantity at different scale. It's very easy. And now at the location, you see where the arrows point, we have a look at what is the distribution of velocity and vorticities. And here is typically what we find. We find vorticity tubes. Here you see the location where the gradient is, where this term is the largest is at the intersection of these lines. And you see it is in the middle of a vortex tube, or it is in between two vorticity sheets. So we did a lot of observation like this. We have a lot of statistics of these things. And so we ask ourselves, so what is the typical structure that is that has the stronger irregularity in our experiment or in the flow? So we did some average, and here is the average velocity field and average structure that we obtain. And what we observe is that it is what is called a Burger vortex. That is, if we look at the vorticity distribution inside this structure, it is shown here as a function of radius. You see that it has a very simple shape, which is a Gaussian shape. And in black, you see a prediction by Burger's equation, and in blue, the observation of our structure. You see that in that direction, it fits very well a Burger's vortex. But it is a kind of more complicated Burger vortex because it is non-axis symmetric. The real Burger's vortex is fully axis symmetric. In our case, we have this little structure on the left that stay here, and that makes deviation from the Burger vortex. And we asked to ourselves, what are these difference with Burger's vortex due to? So to understand it, we run some time resolve measurement in our experiment. And here what you see in red and yellow are vorticity contours. So region where vorticity is very high. And in blue, what you see are the location where the detector of singularity is very big. And if you look carefully, you see that it is becoming very big whenever there is an interaction between vortex. And here you see a better view, maybe it's a closer view. You see, in addition to the vorticity level, you see also in the pink behavior of particles that we followed into the flow. So the particle trying to be tracked by vortices. And here you see clearly that the blue things that characterize location of higher irregularities are exactly at the place where the two vortices interact and probably reconnect. So from this picture, we see that there is a very special role played in turbulence by this vortex interaction. And in fact, nowadays, a lot of people now can study this kind of interaction. And here I show you, for example, a beautiful observation made on interaction of vortices. And you saw that when they start to interact, and you see in panel E, F, G, and H, they start to build tertiary filament, more and more smaller filament. You see that the interaction produces a lot of filaments. So it looks like as if this interaction produces a cascade. And in fact, it was shown by Yaro and Broussard very recently that if you measure the energy spectrum at the location, at the moment where the two vortices interact, indeed, you see the building of the Kolmogorov spectrum. So from this picture, you see that Kolmogorov was right in saying that the cascade comes from an energy budget, but this cascade comes from very, very local interaction. So if we want to correct Kolmogorov, we need a more local approach. And this is what we did, following the work by Duchon and Robert and Yink, etc. We took the Kolmogorov picture and we changed it into a local form. So in the end, what you observe is the same kind of structure than the Karmanov's equation, except that instead of having global average over all the flow, now everything is local. So you still have the variation of the local energy, kinetic energy. There is a flux term. And then there is one term that comes from the dissipation of the energy, which is called D of nu. And then one term that comes from the energy transfer at the scale L. And we call D of L of I, which is our indicator of irregularity. And now, the picture is a little bit different from Kolmogorov because now, since it's local, we can allow any exponent. And now you see that di is the energy transfer term scale like L to the 3 minus H, 3H minus 1, and the viscous term scales like L to the 2H minus 2. And so we now have a different view, a more general view than Kolmogorov is that during an interaction, the energy transfer scale like L to the 3H minus 1, the viscous term scale like 2H minus 2, and the two meet at a certain scale here that you can get by equaling the two. And this scale scales like Reynolds to the minus 1 over 1 plus H. So you have not only the Kolmogorov scale, but for each H, you have a special scale at which the cascade ends and there is dissipation of energy. You see, the big difference with respect to Kolmogorov is that instead of having one single scale to end the cascade, you have locally a lot of little cascades, and each is indeed at a scale that depends on the intensity of the cascade. So for example, you can measure the energy budget in one of these big structures that I've shown you, we did it here, and it corresponds to an exponent H equal 0.2. So now you can do local energy budget and check whether it corresponds to another exponent by Kolmogorov. Here, it's an exponent which is smaller than Kolmogorov, actually. What you can do also is to check that these structures that we have evidence are really responsible from the deviation from the self-similarity, because now you can compute the structure function in two zones. either over the whole flow, so I showed you the result before, or now you can compute the structure function everywhere but at the location of these very singular places. And if you do that, you still have power laws, but now what you can check is that the local scaling exponent now are all following the Kolmogorov law. So this means that by doing that, you have really identified the place where there are deviations from self-similarity. There are these little places where the local energy transfer are very high, where there is vortex interaction, and this is what causes the deviation from Kolmogorov law. So now we have answered to the three last questions. We have shown why does the local scaling work. We have explained it by Navier-Stokes doing local energy budget. We have shown why the exponent 1/3 is so special. There is one last thing is that I didn't answer. Why is the local dissipation log normal, or why is the C of H spectrum has this parabolic shape? Well, this can be done by just checking that, in fact, the multifractal spectrum can be interpreted within a framework of large deviation. So this is done, for example, in the lecture note by Eyink. Since I am running out of time, I will not enter into detail. But by doing this, you can show that C of H is just a rate function of a large deviation theory. And as such, we know that it is convex and it is parabolic near a minimum. And in our case, H mean is the Kolmogorov spectrum. So by going into this framework, we know that the log normality is just an approximation. It is because we are observing only fluctuation close to the most probable exponent. And that maybe there might be deviation from log normality, but we still don't have enough data to measure it. I'm about at the end of my talk. So to conclude, I want just to summarize the model view and then to tell you what implication it has on turbulence modeling. So I have showed you that we can reframe the Kolmogorov theory to take into account the irregular and localized character of the small scale that were first discussed by Batchelor. We have defined a scalar indicator to explore the nature of small scales in experimental and numerical simulation done to the Kolmogorov scale. We have shown that there are coherent structures that live beyond the Kolmogorov scale, that are associated with reconnection event, and there could be the footprints of dissipative singularities of Euler equation or singularities of Navier-Stokes. I have shown you that these structures are connected with intermittency. And now I want to show you that to take them into account, we need to refine our simulation and go beyond the Kolmogorov scale. So this will be my last 3 slides. I remind you that in the Kolmogorov picture, we had a hierarchy of scale by injection scale to the Kolmogorov scale. And doing this, we could make some simulation. But now I have shown you that there are in fact a lot of exponents, and if I extrapolate our experimental data to this point, where after this point, the singularities cannot be observed anymore because their codimension is higher than space dimension. So we can say that the minimum exponent we have to take into account is minus 0.2. And if I take this into account and I do the same kind of a counting of number of degrees of freedom than for Kolmogorov, I find instead of 10 to the 7, a number of degrees of freedom of 8, 10 to the 12 for simulation of our experiment at Reynolds 6000, which is fairly modest. And if I want to go to very large Reynolds number, and which is still much lower than in the atmosphere, then it will mean that instead of taking into account 10 to the 12 degrees of freedom, like in the Kolmogorov theory, now we have to take into account 10 to the 21 degrees of freedom, just because this scale has such small, as such very, very small scale, and it's much smaller than Kolmogorov scale. So I will stop here and be ready to take some questions.
Thank you, Bérenger. Thank you for this beautiful theory of turbulence and for having it stated it in such a clear way. And thank you for pointing at the computational effort we have in front of us.
Yes.
Okay, I encourage people to write their questions, if any, in the Q&A panel, and I will read them to Bérenger. There is already one question by Paolo. I read it. Is it possible to quantify the energy budget associated with turbulence only of a tropical cyclone? Thanks.
Well, I'm not sure what you say by turbulence only, because tropical cyclones are involving not only kinetic energy, but also thermal energy. So if you mean that you want to do an energy budget just of the kinetic energy, it's not possible, because you also have to take into account the thermal energy which will enter. And in fact, using this kind of argument, this kind of local energy budget, you can show that there is an interplay between kinetic energy and thermal energy. And then there are energy exchange through this kind of energy transfer term. And as a function of scale, you can exchange kinetic energy into thermal and thermal into kinetic. So it would not mean anything to just focus on the kinetic energy, because then you will lose a lot of energy going on. But in fact, it is possible to extend this kind of analysis to a situation where there is convection, but then there will be contribution from the thermal energy.
Yeah, I guess there is a bit of ongoing work in your team about that.
Yes.
There's a question by Vikram Singh. Thanks a lot for the talk. Do you think that the fact that the vorticity gradients going to infinity with Reynolds number going to infinity are in conflict with the energy equation for the gradients having a dissipation term?
Okay, I'm not sure about what you mean. Let me go back to Navier-Stokes. Okay, I'm not sure this is what you refer to, but this is Navier-Stokes equation, right? And you see that there are a lot of gradients. There is a gradient here, and here there is a double gradient, Laplacian of u. So if you mean, so apparently, if there is a gradient that diverges to infinity, then you say, how can you write things like this? I mean, if there is a singularity, you cannot take the gradient of something that is diverging, and this is not well defined. And in fact, you are right. If there are really some infinite gradients, then we should do something very cautious about Navier-Stokes equation. And this is what mathematicians do. In fact, they don't consider this equation, but they consider what they call a weak form of Navier-Stokes equation. And in our language, we can say a regularized, a coarse-grained version of the Navier-Stokes equation is that instead of dealing directly with Navier-Stokes equation, we first coarse-grain the equation and deal with this equation. Because once you have coarse-grained the equation, then you have smooth out all the gradients. And you work only with this coarse-grained equation, but then you derive all the laws in the limit where the coarse-graining scale tends to 0. And this is exactly what Duchon and Robert did in this formula. This is exactly how they worked. They coarse-grained the equation, and they derived this by taking the limit L tends to 0 by smoothing everything with this regular function. So I don't know if it answers your question. I'm not sure about your question, but
Okay, there's one question by Sergei Vasilkevich. What are the implications of these new developments to the energy spectrum in the atmosphere and ocean, given the inclusion of rotation and also the dimensional considerations? For instance, can the -2 spectrum be observed in the ocean?
Okay, so here it's another question. If there are rotation or if there are other effects, then there are some implication on the turbulence and on the existence of big gradients. For example, you can show that in the limit turbulence becomes 2D, then these big gradients cannot form anymore and there are no singularities. You can show mathematically that this is impossible to get these big gradients. So more generally, what has been observed is that when you include rotation, in fact, it impedes this energy transfer towards smaller scale. And since these are these energy transfers that drive the singularity, you see the singularity is built by this big energy transfer that goes towards smaller and smaller scale. What we can think, and it's starting to be proven by different means, that the irregularities cannot form when the rotation is too big. So, so the implication is that as you go to higher rotation, or if you go towards very stratified flow, also a lot of situations where the turbulence is constrained and where the energy transfer towards smaller scale are made more and more difficult, then there are less and less irregularities, and these theories becomes less relevant. But to explain the modification by the spectrum, then it's dimensional argument. It's not this theory.
One question by Abdel Nashi. Thanks for the nice talk. How can you reconcile the discontinuity of the velocity and the regularizing effect of viscosity at those Kolmogorov scales?
Okay, so that's what I showed here. I repeat. So if you look at the local energy balance, then you have competition between two terms. You have this term, which is the energy transfer, d of L, which goes like L to the 3h minus 1. And this term d nu, which is the regularization due to viscosity, which goes like L to h minus 2. So there is a competition between the two, and they become equal, and the velocity is regularized at this scale. Eta h is equal to Reynolds minus 1 over 1 plus h. Kolmogorov scale corresponds to h equal 1/3. So this means that this goes like Reynolds to the minus 3/4. If you have a place where locally delta u goes like L to the h with h less than 1/3, then you can easily check that this regularizing scale for this place is smaller than Kolmogorov scale. So this means that the flow will be regularized at a scale smaller than Kolmogorov, just because the singularity is stronger than Kolmogorov singularity. There is even a very special situation. You see that when h is equal to -1, then eta h is equal to 0, because it's Reynolds number to the minus infinity, it's a 0. Okay. So if you have a situation where the singularity is strong enough, delta u goes like to L to the -1, then this singularity is so strong that it cannot be regularized by viscosity. And it's a real singularity of Navier-Stokes. Up to now, we did not observe it. I remind you that the multifractal spectrum here, it sort of stops at h equal -2, -0.2. You know, if I continue, it has a very large codimension, h equal -1, but still, anyway, for this kind of singularities here that are less than 1/3, the flow is regularized at a scale that is smaller than Kolmogorov. This is the main message.
Okay, then Valentin Resseguier, thank you for the great talk. Do you know if the multifactor phenomenologic model of Chevillard and co-author, Gaussian multiplicative chaos, shared the same type of superposition of several fractality? I mean superposition of several spectral slopes with several Kolmogorov scales.
Yes, the model of Chevillard is actually, so it's not based on Navier-Stokes. They try to reproduce exactly this phenomenology, but using multiplicative chaos. It's a sort of synthetic turbulence, if you think. But this synthetic turbulence shares exactly the same properties than turbulence. So this shows that the C of H is not a unique properties of Navier-Stokes. You can build actually another completely different field that does not obey Navier-Stokes that has the same multifractal spectrum. But multiplicative chaos leads to very irregular places, and so it's the same kind of interpretation.
Then Yusuf Baikuni, is internal solution IS propagating in a turbulent fluid the anisotropic characteristics occur on upper ocean multifract? Sorry, I think I don't. I tried. I don't understand this question. Yusuf, can you please rephrase that?
Is it in the chat? I don't see it. I know it's a question and answer.
Yeah. Or maybe you can
read an
internal
them. Soliton propagating in the turbulent fluid.
Ah, soliton. Sorry, I read solution.
Okay. Yes, I don't quite understand.
Okay, I think we can move on to the next question, and maybe Yusuf, can you rewrite the question so that we can read it? Then there's Piñas Alpert. What are the implications of new understanding of turbulence to NWP?
What is NWP?
Numerical weather prediction.
Ah, numerical weather. Ah, well, that's what I said in the end, is that we have a problem of scale here. And the problem here is the following. So I share again my screen. Okay, what I have been saying is that here is the spectrum of the Kolmogorov spectrum. And here what I've been saying is that here, at the location where the energy spectrum is very small, so where you would think that nothing is going on, there is a lot of things going on. There is some very large irregularities, building a very large gradient and all this. And when you do numerical weather prediction, of course, you cannot afford to simulate all these scales. What you do, you cut at a certain large scale, for example, here, and you replace all this by a model, okay? So if you replace all this by a smooth model where you just remove energy, then your weather prediction will be good for the large scale, but it will not be good for the for the fluctuation, in the sense that when you have cut the spectrum here, you have removed all very intense and very localized fluctuation. And for example, you will not able to be to predict the rain very carefully, because the rain, it's a phase transition. So locally, at the location of these very strong singularities, probably there is some large gradient, large local heating. And so if you have a model where you don't modelize these very strong and localized irregularities, you will miss out the snow formation, for example. So the implications are quite strong, is that if we want to improve now our weather model prediction, we should think about models that are able to create this huge localized fluctuation, or this huge localized gradient, that are done naturally by Navier-Stokes, and we have to produce them artificially in a model.
Okay, then there's an anonymous attendant, sorry. Please remind me, isn't there a formula linking the exponent h to the exponent 5/3 for the spectrum? I guess so.
Yes, so in the Kolmogorov theory, you have the well, quite generally, if you have a self-similar velocity field with delta U, for example, equal L to some H, then you can check that the spectrum should be K minus 2H minus 1. So if you put H equal 1/3, then it's K minus 5/3. If you have a turbulence where locally delta U goes like L to the 1, for example, then it will predict K minus 3, etc. But now, if you have a multifractal, the formula is not so simple, and it will be a formula using C of H. It will be some mean over H of whatever, 2H plus C of H minus 1. It will be something like this.
One question by Francois Schmidt. You mentioned the log normal model. Do you plan to check also other models using your data? Some time ago, you advocated log Poisson models.
Yes. Well, in fact, log Poisson has a different shape for C of H. It is more complicated than the simple parabolic. And right now, we don't have enough data to, and of course, what you can show is that the C of H of the log Poisson model, as all the other model, is behaving around H equal minus 1/3 like a parabole. So it's as good as the log normal model. To be able to check between to check different data, we need huge statistics to be able to measure velocity increment with a very large P. And right now, even with our experiment data, we don't have enough statistics to do that. But sure, it's still something. I mean, is really turbulence log normal? We don't know. I mean, log normal, I think, is an approximation for sure. So any model will be log normal near in the range of velocity structure functions that we can measure right now. But now to differentiate between total complete log normal, log Poisson, or other, then you need to be able to have enough statistics on this very, very rare event, the one with a higher gradient. And we have difficulties to do that experimentally, and numerically. You could do it, but you would have to use a special algorithm that are especially fitted to detect very rare event. And someone like Freddy Boucher is using this kind of algorithm. And to my knowledge, nobody tried to use them to try to understand the big intermittency. And it will be probably very interesting to do.